1 Samuel chapter 13. Saul was 30 years old when he became king. He ruled over Israel for 42 years. Saul chose 3,000 of Israel's men. 2,000 of them were with him in Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel. 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah. In the land of Benjamin, Saul sent the rest back to their homes. Some Philistine soldiers were stationed at Geba. Jonathan attacked them, and the other Philistines heard about it. So Saul announced, "Let the Hebrew people hear about what has happened." He had the trumpets blown all through the land, so all the Israelites heard the news. They were told, "Saul has attacked the Philistine army camp at Geba." And now the Philistines cannot stand the Israelites. The Israelites were called out to join Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines gathered together to fight against Israel. They had 3,000 chariot and 6,000 chariot drivers. These soldiers were as many as the grains of sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash. It was east of Beth-aven. The Israelites saw that their army was in deep trouble, so they hid in caves. They hid among bushes and rocks. They also hid in pitch and empty wells. Some of them even went across the Jordan River. They went to the land of God and Gilead. The Saul remained in Gilgal. All the troops with him were shaking with fear. He waited 7 days, just as Samuel has told him to do. But Samuel didn't come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the friendship offering." Then he offered up the burnt offering. Just as Saul finished offering the sacrifice, Samuel arrived. Saul went out to greet him. "What have you done?" asked Samuel. Saul replied, "I saw that the men were scattering. I saw that the Philistines were gathering together at Michmash. You didn't come when you said you would, so I thought, now the Philistines will come down to attack me at Gilgal. And I haven't asked the Lord for his blessing, so I felt I had to sacrifice the burnt offering. You have done a foolish thing." Samuel said, You have not obeyed the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have made your kingdom secure over Israel for all the time to come. But now your kingdom will not last. The Lord has already looked for a man who is dear to his heart. He has appointed him king of his people. That's because you haven't obeyed the Lord's command. Then Samuel left Gilgal and went up to Gibeah in the land of Benjamin. Saul counted the men who were with him. The total number was about 600. Saul and his son Jonathan were staying in Gibeah in the land of Benjamin. The men who remained in the army were there with them. At the same time, the Philistines camped at Michmash. 3 groups of soldiers went out from the Philistine camp to attack Israel. One group turned and went toward Ophrah in the area of Shur. Another went toward the Beth Horon. The third went toward the border that looked out over the valley of Zeboim. That valley faces the desert. There were not any blacksmiths in the whole land of Israel. That's because the Philistines had said the Hebrews might hire them to make swords or spears. So all the Israelites had to go down to the Philistines. They had to go to them to get their plows, hoes, axes, and sickles sharpened. It cost a fourth of an ounce of silver to sharpen a plow or hoe. It cost an eighth of an ounce to sharpen a pitchfork or an axe. That's also what it cost to put new tips on the large sticks used to driven oxen. So the Israelite soldiers went out to battle without swords or spears in their hands. That was true for all of Saul's and Jonathan's soldiers. Only Saul and his son Jonathan had those weapons. A group of Philistine soldiers had gone out to the pass at Michmash. 1 Samuel chapter 14. One day, Jonathan, the son of Saul, spoke to the young man carrying his armor. "Come on," he said. "Let's go over to the Philistine army camp on the other side of the pass." But he didn't tell his father about it. Saul was staying just outside Gibeah. He was under a pomegranate tree in Migron. He had about 600 men with him. Ahijah was one of them. He was wearing a sacred linen apron. He was son of Igav's brother Ahitub. Ahitub was the son of Eli's sons, Phinehas. Eli had been the Lord's priest in Shiloh. No one was aware that Jonathan had left. Jonathan planned to go across the pass to reach the Philistine camp, but there was a cliff on each side of the pass. One cliff was called Bozez, the other was called Sheneh. One cliff stood on the north side of the pass toward Mimash. The other stood on the south side toward Gibeah. Jonathan spoke to the young man carrying his armor. He said, "Come on, let's go over to the camp of those followers who are not circumcised. Perhaps the Lord will help us. If He does, it won't matter how many or how few of us there are. They won't keep the Lord from saving us." "Go ahead," the young man said. "Do everything you have in mind. I'm with you all the way." Jonathan said, "Come on then. We'll go across the pass toward the Philistine and let them see us. Suppose they say to us, 'Wait there until we come to you.' Then we will stay there where we are. We won't go up to them. But suppose they said, 'Come up to us.' Then we will climb up. That will show us that the Lord has handed them over to us." So Jonathan and the young man let the soldiers in the Philistine camp see them. "Look," said the Philistine, "some of the Hebrews are crawling out of the holes they were hiding in." The men in the Philistine camp shouted to Jonathan and the young man carrying his armor. They said, "Come on up here. We will teach you a thing or two." So Jonathan said to the young man, "Climb up after me. The Lord has handed them over to Israel." Using his hands and feet, Jonathan climbed up. The young man was right behind him. Jonathan struck down the Philistines. The young man followed him and killed those who were still alive. In that first attack, Jonathan and the young man killed about 20 men. They did it in an area of about half an acre. Then a panic struck the whole Philistine army. It struck those who were in the camp and those in the field. It struck those who were at the edge of the camp. It also struck those who were in the groups that had been sent out to attack Israel. The ground shook. It was a panic that God had sent. Swords looked out at Gibeah in the land of Benjamin, saw what was happening. They saw the Philistine army melting away in all directions. Then Saul spoke to the man with him. He said, "Bring the troops together. See who has left our camp." When they did, they discovered that Jonathan and the young man carrying his armor were not there. Saul said to Ahijah the priest, "Bring the ark of God." At that time, it was with the Israelite. While Saul was talking to the priest, the noise in the Philistine camp got louder and louder. So Saul said to the priest, "Stop what you are doing." Then Saul and his old men gathered together. They went to the battle. They saw that the Philistines were in total disorder. They were striking one another with their swords. At an earlier time, some of the Hebrews had been on the side of the Philistines. They had gone up with them to their camp, but now they changed sides. They joined the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. Some of the Israelites had hidden in the hill country of Ephraim. They heard that the Philistines were running away. They quickly joined the battle and chased after them. So on that day, the Lord saved Israel, and the fighting continued on past Beth-aven. The Israelites became very hungry that day. That's because Saul had forced the army to make a promise. He had said, "None of you must eat any food before evening comes. You must not eat until I paid my enemies back for what they did. If you do, may you be under a curse." So none of the troops ate any food at all. The whole army entered the woods, and there was honey on the ground. When they went into the woods, they saw the honey dripping out of a honeycomb. No one put any of the honey in his mouth. They were afraid of the curse that would come if they broke their promise. But Jonathan had not heard that his father had forced the army to make a promise. Jonathan had a long stick in his hand. He reached out and dipped the end of it into the honeycomb. He put some honey in his mouth. It gave him new life. Then one of the soldiers told him, "Your father forced the army to make a promise that everyone must obey. He said, 'None of you must eat any food today. If you do, may you be under curse.' That's why the men are weak and ready to faint." Jonathan said, "My father has made trouble for the country. See how I gain new life after I tasted a little of his honey. Our soldiers took food from their enemies today. Suppose they had eaten some of it, how much better off they would have been. Even more Philistines would have been killed. That day, the Israelites struck down the Philistines. They killed them from Michmash to Aijalon. By that time, they were tired and worn out. They grabbed what they taken from their enemies. They killed some of the sheep, cattle, and calves right there on the ground. They ate the meat while the blood was still in it. And then someone said to Saul, "Look, the men are sinning against the Lord. They are eating meat that still has blood in it." Saul said to them, "You have broken your promise. Roll a large stone over here at once." He continued, "Go out among the men. Tell them, each of you bring me your cattle and sheep. Kill them here and eat them. Don't sin against the Lord by eating meat that still has blood in it." So that night everyone brought the ox he had taken and killed it there. Then Saul built an altar to honor the Lord. It was the first time he had done that. Saul said, "Let's go down and chase after the Philistines tonight. Let's not leave even one of them alive. Let's take everything they have before morning." "Do what you think is best," they replied. But the priest said, "Let's ask God for advice first." So Saul asked God, "Should I go down and chase after the Philistines? Will you hand them over to Israel?" But God didn't answer him that day. Saul said to the leaders of the army, "Come here, let's find out what sin has been committed today. The Lord is the one who rescues Israel. You can be sure that the Lord lives. And you can be just as sure that the sinner must die. He must die even if he's my son Jonathan." But no one said anything. Then Saul said to all the Israelites, "You stand over there. I and my son Jonathan will stand over here. Do what you think is best," they replied. Then Saul prayed to the Lord, the God of Israel. He said, "Why haven't you answered your servant today? If I or my son Jonathan is to blame, answer with Urim. But if the Israelites are to blame, answer with Thummim." Jonathan and Saul were chosen by casting lots. The other men were cleared of blame. Saul said, "Cast the lot to find out whether I or my son Jonathan is to blame." And Jonathan was chosen. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." So Jonathan told him, "I used the end of my stick to get a little honey and taste it. And now do I have to die?" Saul said, "Jonathan, I must certainly put you to death. If I don't, may God punish me greatly." But the man said to Saul, "Should Jonathan be put to death? Never. He has saved Israel in a wonderful way. He did it today with God's help. You can be sure that the Lord lives, and you can be just as sure that not even one hair on Jonathan's head will fall to the ground." So the man rescued Jonathan. He wasn't put to death. Then Saul stopped chasing the Philistine. They went back to their own land. After Saul became the king of Israel, he fought against Israel's enemies who were all around them. He went to war against Moab, Ammon, and Edom. He fought against the king of Jova and the Philistines. No matter where he went, he punished his enemies. He fought bravely. He won the battle over the Amalekites. He saved Israel from the power of those who had carried off what belonged to Israel. Saul's sons were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchishua. Saul's older daughter was named Merab. His younger daughter was named Michal. Saul's wife was named Ahinoam. She was the daughter of Ahimaaz. The commander of Saul's army was named Avner. He was the son of Ner. Ner was Saul's uncle. Saul's father Kish and Avner's father Ner was son of Avier. As long as Saul was king, he had to fight hard against the Philistine. So every time Saul saw a strong, brave man, he took him into his army.